Hey folks, welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who help build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies who's passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy through acting as our client's fractional security organization. Today, I'm super excited to have Tony Milne with us today. And Tony's a well-recognized leader here in CBUS Tech with a deep career as a technology leader and executive. At his last company, Tony, as VP of Engineering, helped raise $44 million in Series A funding. Since then, Tony joined CredHub as CTO. And what I find really interesting is he transitioned from CTO to president and COO. So Tony moved from a technology to a more business-focused leader. So thinking about that, Tony, the transition from technology executive to business operations, what has that experience been for you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Warner. It's a pleasure to be here. That transition is different, but it felt natural for me to, the scope of the things that I'm responsible for now include our operations, which is making sure that our customers are satisfied. And in our world, we kind of have two customers. We have property managers that are direct and our indirect customers, which are the residents. So kind of making sure that everybody is taken care of. And then, of course, finance and accounting as well as sales, which I think that most people want to run away from anything sales related. And just growing up the way I did and, my surroundings, I was always kind of surrounded by salespeople. And so it feels natural to me to kind of be a part of that. So that was not unnatural at all. So it's been interesting kind of transitioning from just pure technology leader to the business leader here. There's a lot different responsibilities, a lot of different types of things that are in my purview here, but it's been good.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I look at technology as a complex system, right? That's partly what attracted me to technology early in my career. And what I've learned later is businesses are maybe the most complex system I've known, which
Mm.
I'm sure some of the technologists listening today are rolling their eyes at that statement. But for you, Tony, you say it was an easy transition. And with the technology executives I've known over the years, I'd say you're an exception. And the average tech exec I've known wouldn't think managing a sales team instead of an engineering team an easy transition. So, what do you think makes it easy for you? Think about some of the different things or approaches you've had to take between engineering and sales, and what are some stories you might have?
I think as most people will say when they get to some sort of point in their career, it's been the past that kind of got me to here. And my entire career, I've been a technologist solving problems, but it's not just tell me your problem and tell me what you want your solution to be. It's been embedding myself into every single thing so I can understand how you think. When I was at a former company, we were a real estate investment trust, and we owned and operated shopping centers and malls. So we had lots of different departments. We had legal and accounting and marketing and everything under the sun. When we talked about what things were needed from legal, I really want to understand how legal worked. How did litigation work for them? How did when they're drafting leases and kind of negotiating, what's that look like? Because the problems we're trying to solve I needed to understand exactly how their business worked. And that even kind of went over to the sales side of that because we did a lot for, how we drive revenue in the front door. And that's true for most companies too, is if you understand how you're driving money in the front door, uh, you can really help to build the business a bit better. Um, so in my history, just being trying to be as tightly integrated into each of those business units and departments was critical to me being able to make sure myself and my team were able to deliver solutions back. And so you just naturally hang on to all these knowledge components over time, and you use that to get yourself into a position that seems natural to move into.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Taking interest in our colleagues' work in other areas of the business. I know in multiple tech companies I've helped build, I made a point to get pretty close to the customer. In some cases, that even meant taking calls.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I was reading an article recently. One of the rideshare companies, I think it's their current CEO. They're regularly delivering food and driving people, like to the point where it's hundreds of rides a year,
Oh,
which I,
wow.
I just thought was really, really cool, right? And if you think of a rideshare company, the entire business is technology, but
Yeah.
the customer experience is, I think we often overlook in some of the technology products we build and live
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, as technologists, we're solving problems, but we're solving problems for people. And so those people want to feel like they're being serviced well and feel like they're well understood. And so the only way you can do that is if you have that drive to really want to understand them. And you'll be amazed the lessons you learn. And even if you don't move into a different area of work than technology, it will hone your skills and your deliverables a lot more. Our technology tools that we use constantly change and evolve, and so we never just kind of sit into one specific technology our entire career, and that's what we do. And so that's always changing. So we're always finding new solutions for folks. And if we understand what people's problems are, as we find new solutions, find new technologies, we can apply those and help our colleagues, help our business. And sometimes we're also thinking about like how do we scale the business with our technology and processes.
Hmm. Thinking about processes and driving scalability, do you have more thoughts around that?
Yeah, yeah. I think that especially when you're a smaller company, but even larger works, we're always thinking about how can we scale our revenue without also scaling our workforce. We don't want to necessarily have to, for every dollar we bring in, we have to think about what fractional piece of headcount we have to add so they're not growing linearly together. We want that scalability in there. So if we're a technologist and we're thinking about it and we're thinking about the business, we're thinking, okay, how do we make this better? How do we make this process better? And these are lessons that you start and kind of becomes muscle memory that if you become into the business leader side of things, you start thinking in that way too. Like, well, how can I make this process better? Maybe it's not purely a technology play, but how do I just make this process better? Because it seems like there's a lot of you're looking at something and you see a problem or you see somebody continually doing the same thing over and over again, but they're kind of just figuring it out as they go. Creating a process around that gives everybody a better way to do it. And then now that could probably scale because you could probably find inefficiencies in there that we can rectify.
Yeah, thinking about process and scalability, it's interesting. Like in my current company and other companies too, tech companies, we've generally had a lot less business operations staff. Think mid well, as entry to mid-level individual contributor, that are accounting and finance or business operations. And I think like back in the 90s, right, a lot of the business problems we solved with tech, and from an operational efficiency perspective, we got rid of data entry, right?
Yeah.
And now we're going through another resurgence with our latest incarnation of tech with Gen AI, where we're finding ways humans can focus on higher impact activities. So we have a new sets of work that were difficult to automate are now easier to automate. And I know in my business, I've found few situations where I couldn't automate tactical work. So really reducing the administrative overhead in the company.
Yeah.
Are you finding opportunities like that? Are those what you're thinking about when it comes to having not having headcount scale directly with revenue, or do you have specific examples of what you're working with?
Yeah. Every time that I hear somebody doing a process that's really repetitive, like I get some sort of input and this is the output I do. I get an email in from customer and this is what I respond with. And it's like, well, these are just patterns that we can replicate in some sort of way. So we're we are working on some AI ways to handle that because a lot of times we're getting the same type of questions from both our property management companies as well as residents. And it's going to go a little bit beyond just like our traditional if then kind of bot where you would say, oh, if they ask this question, then answer it this way. And it's kind of prompt recognition that way, like the old prompts, like, is it this question, that question, to more of a conversational thing. So we are doing some of that stuff. We're also exploring some more voice things for inbound sales activities, but we have to be kind of careful on how we do that because that is kind of messing with revenue too. So, but in general, though, any process that we see that we can improve upon, we have to do that. And I think that there's two factors to that. One is just internally, if you're trying to scale your business and grow it, you have to have process because if you do grow and you will add people over time, even though you're trying to potentially limit that expense, you need to have people trained. You need to have everybody doing the same thing. Otherwise, it's just complete chaos. And then if you're building a business for the purpose of an acquisition, the acquisition team wants to make sure that they're buying something that's really
Mhm.
well oiled. If it's not well oiled and it doesn't have a good process and there's a lot of work to do there and a lot of efficiency to gain, maybe you're not going to get the premium that you could have gotten by doing all this work before.
I I had a few things come to mind through what you shared, but one thing that I've not commonly talked about is I was hanging out with an entrepreneur, a seasoned entrepreneur, not so long ago, and he was talking about a business he sold, and it was a pretty big transaction. And with the sale, he didn't have an earnout. So commonly, when somebody sells a business, the key members of the executive team, often owners or co-founders, have to remain for a multiple of years, usually 1 to 3 years, to transition after sale. And there's financial terms tied to that. So he didn't have an earnout. He just sold the thing and pieced out. And for a
Wow.
meaningful transaction like that, I'd not heard that firsthand before. I'm like, what? How did you pull that off? And what I thought was interesting is he fully embraced EOS, Entrepreneur's Operating System, which is covered in the book Traction here on my desk. And put a little more tangibly, he basically had the entire company operating independent of him. And he had a COO, he had a CEO, a fully functioning executive team, and he served on the board. He owned the company, but the company didn't need him to work. So
Yeah.
I hadn't heard a much better example for embracing process. And even an entrepreneurial company, frequently in entrepreneurial companies, people turn their noses up to process, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, EOS, very familiar with it. We we implemented it in my prior company, and we've implemented it here at CredHub too. Uh, if you ever read the book Good to Great, if you read that book and then you look at EOS and then traction, which is kind of the way to operationalize EOS, you'll see where it came from. But I think that in traction and having kind of regular meetings, having metrics, OKRs that you're looking at, you're measuring the business every week, you're measuring it every month, you're seeing how things are changing, you're discussing with your team all of your issues, you're kind of working through problems weekly. It just creates a nice cadence to the business. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that go along with it where they kind of give you tools on how you have the right people in your organization. I can't remember if Traction says this or if it also says it in Good to Great, but it's about this bus concept and do you have the right people on the bus and are they in the right seats? And that's a really critical thing when you think about people in the organization too, is like we might have the right people and Tony and Warner might be the right people, but they're maybe in the wrong seats on the bus. And so there's all these other kind of tools that go along with traction there that really help you get your business in order. And if you have started your company, you've been running for a while, and it's going well, it's going to feel really odd to implement any type of process like this because you're going to feel like I've got it under control. But I think if you were to implement a EOS or anything like that and kind of have really good process around it, you'll feel a lot better about your business. You'll have a lot more understanding of it. And the big thing is if you own the business, eventually you probably want to walk away, whether it's still operating and you're just kind of collecting a check, or if you want to sell it too, you can just say like, here's my asset and here's how it operates and you don't need me. That mentality is an interesting mentality that also trickles back to any type of leadership role. Uh, if you're a director of app dev and you want to get promoted, you need to be able to make yourself promotable, right? And you need to be able to make sure that you've got good succession or you can get yourself out of that really easily. If you are hyper dependent in a role, you're probably not going to move out of that very easily. And that doesn't matter what role you're in.
Yeah, I love that point you made. Something I embraced pretty early in my career, even as an individual contributor, is that I couldn't be promoted if I couldn't be replaced.
Yeah.
And I think that is, well, true in our careers where we have jobs. But I've also worked with a founder years back where I watched him replace himself in a high growth company, a very high growth, scaled from about 20, 30 folks to 500 in less than 4 years. So I watched him replace himself rapidly in so many different roles and elevating his role the whole time. And I think that's a great example because if he hadn't done that, it would have limited the scale of the company. At a certain point, it'd be a glass ceiling. You might
Yeah.
not have a feedback loop, but the company's not going to go further at that point. And that's true of us in management and leadership roles, or even as individual contributors. And I think it's not natural for humans. It wasn't always natural for me in any way. It's like we we think we have to protect this work. Only we can do it, and we need to be essential,
Right.
or we'll get fired. Well, the thing that's less intuitive is in our best interest and in our organization's best interest too.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird leap of faith you have to take because like you said, I think we've all been conditioned into the way I have security is that I'm the most important person to the organization or in this role. And uh, there's actually a lot more security in the inverse of that. If you can get yourself into a way that's replaceable, you're going to be seen as a way to help grow the business. And it's a funny leap of faith you have to take.
Hmm. Yeah, it really is. The most valuable person in a career is often the most easily replaced.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Because certain skill sets become widely known skill sets, and they do actually become replaceable anyway. If I'm leading an organization and I have somebody that I am absolutely dependent upon, oh my gosh, this thing would fail if it weren't for Warner, that's a massive risk to the business. And so
Mhm.
naturally, a leader will try to break that out anyway. So if you don't already think about how do I generally make myself replaceable, it's going to happen anyway, and it's going to happen in a way that you don't like it.
Yeah, yeah. I've been in. I have so many stories from different perspectives there. I think one caveat with this is it's important to be in a healthy culture, right?
Oh,
There
sure.
there are a lot of lessons that can be had in less healthy cultures where these things might not be as true, but it's usually the toxicity in the company limits the overall success of the company and frequently will prematurely kill the company. So
Yeah.
even though those lessons might not be true in the macro in that situation in the macro sense they are.
Yeah, that's a valid point too. And those toxic environments will eventually implode or they will change. If hopefully somebody will recognize that
Mhm.
it's a problem and that it's a risk for the business overall, and it changes. But if not, there's likely to be an implosion.
Yeah, and great thing is there's a lot of healthy companies out there, and something I like to say is life's too short to work in a toxic team or a toxic culture. So if any folks are out there in those situations, know there are options. You don't have to stay there forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so as far as CredHub, I know you touched on it, but you didn't
Oh, yeah.
describe you didn't share your elevator pitch for CredHub. So if you would do that, but the reason why I'm asking you to do that is I know you have some interesting stories around pivoting from services to SaaS, and having more context about what CredHub is will help that story.
Yeah. Well, so credit at our core, what we're doing is we're helping individuals improve their financial well-being by impacting their credit score. And the way that we're doing that is by reporting their rental payments to the credit bureaus. So, there's something on the order of 45 million renters, and about 10% of those, this is in the US, about 10% of those are actually being reported to the credit bureaus in any sort of way. There's a large percentage of that is being reported negatively, for past due balances and uh, evictions and all that fun stuff. But the folks that do pay their rent on time, and it's called 30 to 40% of their gross income, aren't getting anything reflected on their credit report, and yet they've been great tenants all this time. And we know that if you want to get other financial products such as an auto loan, or some states still have a big dependency on your credit score relative to insurance rates. All these different things are still kind of tied to your credit score. Um, and yet they're not getting the benefit of that. But if you go get a mortgage, you certainly have that. So we're trying to help change that. And then the way that we do it right now is we sell to the property management companies, and we work business to business, and then they operationalize the product with their residents. So
Cool.
it's a great tool. It's a great tool for the property managers. It adds a benefit for them to incentivize people to be at their property. It adds a benefit for the residents too. It's helping them improve their score. We also have an identity theft protection product that we offer as a bolt-on. It gives them, $1 million in liability protection and dark web monitoring and all that kind of fun ID theft protection stuff. And some take that and some don't, but it's another great product that we have that really is adjacent to what we primarily provide. So that's what CredHub does, and CredHub's been around since 2018. 2018 is an interesting year because I believe in 17, when the FICO model and the Vantage model changed. So we've all heard of credit scores. What those credit scores are is they're a numeric representation of, call it, your risk factor, and FICO is the most well known, and there's been iterations of that. So now there's FICO 9. FICO 8 was obviously before that. Some products still use FICO 8 to kind of look at your score that way. Others use FICO 9. Why I bring this up is when the FICO 9 score came about, I'm getting really kind of nerdy about this, but the FICO 9 score came about, they included the rental trade line as a specific category. So it used to be you could always report it, no big deal. It just go into the other bucket and it didn't really have any impact. Now, when something is specifically categorized, that can be weighted. And so that is weighted into your score. And so it can have a larger impact for you, both positively and negatively for that matter. But mostly we're saying positively, we see that. So that happened about 2017, which kind of gave birth to companies like CredHub. And CredHub was one of the first companies to do this and come to market with this product and bring it out. So we've been doing it for a long time. We operate in the US and in Canada as well.
Cool. That's really interesting about FICO 9. I get nerdy about that stuff too, but I didn't know that one of the major changes was FICO 9 was including rent payment history in the overall model.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the changes, and I think it was a great change. And not every financial product uses the FICO 9 model. Will use the FICO 8, but over time they'll kind of navigate to that, and it all depends upon how they're kind of underwriting those products and the risk factors involved. So what we looked at, about a year and a half ago, I guess it'd be a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half ago now, is there is a continual movement to increase renters being reported to the credit bureau. More recently, California passed a law that said all property managers must offer rent reporting to their residents. And so we're seeing other legislation being written at the state level. We've seen some written at more of a local level, but we're seeing now more and more be written at the state level. And this is kind of creating a surge of folks that need to be reported. And so while we can certainly do it, CredHub can certainly do it, we see that there's going to be a lot more competition, a lot more opportunity for folks to offer this. And so we do this very, very well. And we said, well, our technology we have is really the component to this, that and our service too. But so we navigated going through our system and saying, what is it that our technology does and how can we build a platform around that? And that's exactly what we built. So in less than a year, we took our entire platform, rebuilt it from the ground up, and created a SaaS platform that is built for any type of trade line to be reported. And then we created a specific vertical for rental reporting, and that's kind of where we're navigating to. So now we offer our SaaS platform where other technology companies, if you're a payment portal provider or any kind of other technology company, an insurance provider, anything like that, you want to add rent reporting as a product, there's just a thin layer, really like the UI side of things that you add on yourself, and you can plug in our SaaS product as your own tenant and you're off to the races.
Huh, that's so cool. And so it sounds like you have an API that other tech companies, well, it doesn't have to be a tech company, but can integrate with for rental reporting.
Yeah.
So that's B2B too, but opened up a completely new market for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, it certainly has, and it's been an interesting one for us to navigate through. It was kind of funny. We released it and we got going with it, and we signed a couple deals within the first couple months of it being released, and we continue to iterate on it and make it better and better. And it's a really good product that we think will continue to grow. And so this shifting between just being a pure service company to being a SaaS company is interesting for our business too. The reality is we will always have the service side of it too that we've kind of coined as brand CredHub. And so that will always exist. But we'll have our SaaS platform here too that we can service. And then the other thing with this, it always comes up is, okay, if you're reporting to the credit bureaus, consumers have questions because they see this on their credit report. Who are they calling? Well, we have a wraparound service for this. Well, CredHub still manages all that. So the resident is calling CredHub. The resident, if they have disputes, is contacting CredHub.
Hmm.
The resident, if they have bankruptcies or anything like that, where there's something that's off on the credit report, they deal with CredHub. And so it almost becomes like a complete white labeling of the technology and the service.
Huh. And that creates some stickiness too, because admittedly, as we're talking, I'm like, well, there's probably some proprietary nature in integrating with FICO, but it's relatively trivial to build that. But putting my tech hat on, right? I'm sure there's more to it, but that was a thought I had. But with that, you're not only creating branding in the reporting, you're creating stickiness because there's overhead and more um, operational overhead, more services or lines of business somebody would have to build to compete directly. And
Yeah.
that's
And
really
then,
interesting.
well, and it's not just that, you also have to understand. So the moat keeps growing, if you're going to kind of put it in that way, the moat keeps getting bigger because uh, you also have to understand the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And then depending upon how you report residents, the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act comes into play. Plus, you got to understand some state legislations too, and what has to be offered and how it has to be offered and other things like that. And then there are conflicts like that California law I mentioned. There are pieces of it that conflict with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but it's allowed. I won't get into it, but it's allowed basically for the states to override certain aspects of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is kind of funny to think about. So there's all these things that you have to understand, be very knowledgeable, keep up with. Plus, you got to have the technology to do it. And then as there are consumer disputes, questions, things like that, somebody goes on their credit report and hits dispute this, that comes into CredHub and we're handling that. So there's a lot more to it than just, hey, it's a technology and it's flowing through. And I mean, to your point, Warner, folks can bang a bunch of black plastic keys together and probably figure it out and get something there. Although it's a lot more challenging as everything is when you get in the details, but it's all these other components that build that moat and add that stickiness.
I'm curious, it sounds like that type of credit reporting is only available to FICO 9, so it's not available in Vantage or any of the other credit
But
reporting.
yeah, Vantage 3.0 also did it. So there was Vantage 2.0 and then Vantage 3.0 is also the other credit score that has adopted rental reporting as well.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like a really healthy societal trend too, because I know some people have been locked out of credit products where they should have access to them, but
Yeah.
just because they didn't have a history. So it even helped people earlier in their lives where they might be moving out on their own for the first time, but have no credit history, so can't get a credit card. Well,
Yeah.
CredHub it helps establish early credit too. So really cool stuff.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. There's some other things too that are kind of butterfly effects of this too, identity fraud, things like that that help kind of get closed in on because if you're reporting a rental trade line, now here's an actual trade line. Maybe Warner never had anything on his credit report before. I won't get into it. There are ways that fraudulent people could basically steal Warner's identity by establishing a different trade line. But if you have a trade line established already, it makes it more difficult for somebody else to now add a trade line and kind of take over that. It also helps as people are being screened for new apartments or new rental units or other things too to validate their identity. So there's a lot more to it that kind of happens because of rental reporting that is beyond just purely the direct effect of their credit report improving.
Cool. And as far as putting a cap on the discussion here, I know when I've helped scale some B2B SaaS companies before, it's common, especially in enterprise market, it's common for certain industries to want custom software or want more of a services approach as opposed to a tech approach. And for me and my colleagues in those environments, we had to be stubborn in many cases, difficult, where even though our customers wanted something and we want to be responsive to what our customers want, the type of business we're building, we needed to build features in the product so it's scalable and not just throw headcount or people at solving our clients' business problems. So in my experience, it can be quite different, just even on the technology business side of things, in how we scale a product versus services company. I'm curious if you have any stories or firsthand accounts and how that transition has affected you and your teams at CredHub.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as a smaller business too, it's hard to say no to customers because you feel like you're kind of you're afraid of them running away from you. We have had to say no to customers in the past, and we have had to push back. But there are places where you have to think about it a little bit stronger and say, is this request something that will be valid for us in the future? We haven't really thought about it. It seems like it's a nuance for this customer, but there is value in adding that. And so you kind of get a 2-for-1 win there. We've certainly had a lot of that where, gosh, we're able to pick up a lot more customers that were maybe unserviced because it was hard. And I won't get into the reason, but it was hard to do it. And we're like, okay, well, let's figure out why it's hard. Let's go through the pain and go through that friction a little bit. And it turned out, wow, we can solve this and we can create some more technology around it too and reduce that friction. And now we were able to pick up other customers that were previously unserviceable. And so we go through that quite often. I think especially when you're a bit smaller or you're starting up, you've got to be able to weigh those things and um, and make good decisions about it. So sometimes you will have to say no, but uh, a lot of times you really got to think, is this going to be good for us overall? And I think most of the time it'll be yes. And so it's just when are you going to do it?
Yeah, I like your thought being strategic and because it's not a binary thing.
Right.
It's not about saying no. It's about, well, maybe services does make sense here because it's profitable early on and we can scale it without affecting the operations or business of our tech product we're building. So
Yeah.
it's not mutually exclusive. In fact, large companies do that all day long. Think S&P 500, right? It's not product versus services. It's just whether or not the business case makes sense. And
Yeah.
at scale, it's easier to throw people at problems because profitability is easier to find at scale. Whereas if you have to add a couple of headcount in a smaller company, it
Yeah.
makes a big difference.
Yeah. And what typically happens in a smaller company is people end up taking more onto their plate than what they can eat, and how it becomes a stretch. But then it's a momentary stretch because you're learning. what are you doing? How can you do this better? And how can you make this more efficient? And that's where the whole getting back to kind of going first full circle on this, where process comes into play. And considering what that process is so you can make that better. So you don't have to say no as often because it doesn't seem like it fits in the box.
Oh, that's great. I like how you brought us full circle there, Tony.
It all goes back to process, I think.
Well, thank you for listening and being here today with us, Tony. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
You know, throughout my career, I've always, and I'm just a little bit of a nerd in this way too. I always like to read books. And by the way, I don't know where people's positions are on this, but I think if you listen to audiobooks, that's the same thing as saying reading. I feel like it's the same thing. You're getting the same knowledge. So I primarily listen to audiobooks, but there are so many great ones out there. But regardless if you're a technologist or not, the couple that always boil up are Good to Great. I mentioned that earlier, Jim Collins, and that's a really good book there. I think Brene Brown's Dare to Lead is a good one. It kind of brings in some emotional intelligence piece, which you and I have talked about before. Um, so you really got to understand people. I think, especially as technologists, you consider that it's just black and white. It is what it is, and that's it. And there's a lot more emotional piece tied to that. I got two more. Radical Candor is a good one. It kind of goes along with this a bit about people. It's how to deliver messages to people in a way that's straightforward, but not being a jerk. Uh, so that's a good one. And then if you've ever been on a big technology project, you gotta read the Phoenix Project
Hmm.
because that's you just sit there and you're laughing. You're like, I know who that person is. I know who that person is. I know who that person is. It's just that's a fun read. So, uh, I think it's good to continue to grow and understand and grow your knowledge base. And I think that reading or listening to other podcasts too are excellent ways to continue to kind of expand your horizons.
Well, that's a great reading list, Tony. I advocate for those books too. And Phoenix Project, as far as tech books, tech leadership books, and that's on my top list for that subject. And I agree. I used to be a little snobby about listening versus reading, but there's only so much time of the day, and
Yeah.
I use a lot of downtime, like driving or where I wouldn't be able to read, but it can be productive thanks to audiobooks.
Yeah, 100%. It's great. It's just being efficient with your time.
Well, thanks again for being here with us today, Tony. And thank you all for listening to Project Gamma, presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes.